up.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Ben Dowling and I'm the new chair of the Employment Committee. Thank you for your time today. Quick housekeeping: if the fire alarm does sound, then it is real and we should evacuate the building as quickly and safely as possible, meeting at the Queen Victoria statue in Guildhall Square. And if you did sign in to the Guildhall reception upon entering the building, please make sure you sign out when leaving the building. We are streaming live online for today's meeting, and there are cameras at the back of the room. If any members of the public have a problem with being filmed, then please indicate. There are no members of the public here, so that makes it all a lot simpler. Welcome. You didn't miss anything, Councillor Jones, apart from if there's a fire, leave the building. Apologies for absence. Have we had any, Stuart?
I think Mr. Williams, Chief Executive.
Thank you. Declaration of interest, anyone? Cal? Sorry, Councillor Corkery.
I'm a member of the Trade Union Unison.
Okay. And do we have any problem with Cal being here for the item? I assume not. No? Okay, wonderful. In which case we will do minutes of the previous meeting. I wasn't here for it. Are those that were here happy with them?
I'm happy to propose them.
Thank you. I'm assuming I can't sign them off. I can only note them on the basis that I wasn't here.
I'm happy to sign.
Wonderful. In which case we'll move to item 4, trade union facility reporting, and we've got a deputation in the room from Mr. Alan Tier from Unison. But I believe it would be helpful, if it's okay with you, sir, that we have a bit of an introduction to the item first. Colleagues?
Okay, so this is a statutory report that requires annual publication and was introduced in 2017. The appendix, if agreed, will be published on the PCC website and government-maintained website. In terms of the regulations, they're very specific as to how the data should be produced, and the report has been produced in line with those guides. The report separates central functions and education functions, and just for clarity, central functions include PCC staff and non-teaching staff, and education refers to the schools. In terms of non-teaching staff, they have the ability to be represented by PCC central funded trade unions, but they do not contribute towards the funding of PCC. In terms of the central function employees, the number of officials have decreased since the last report from 23.74 FTE to 14.92 FTE. This is due to a number of reps having left the organisation or retired, and the trade unions have struggled to backfill and recruit new representatives. The number of employees spending between 1 and 50% of time on facilities activities has increased from 6 to 15, but this can be largely attributed to new representatives and the training that's undertaken. In terms of the percentage of the pay bill, this has seen a slight increase from 0.3% to 0.4%, and the cost has increased slightly from 37,540 to 41,732. And just to clarify, PCC centrally fund 37,500, and the remainder is a cost that's absorbed by the services.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think that's really helpful just to set the scene, as it were. Over to you, sir.
Hello, thank you. I'm Alan Tier, Joint Branch Secretary for Unison Portsmouth Branch. I'd like to discuss agenda item 4, as you mentioned, and how some of those figures included look on the ground for someone like me, trying to represent members within PCC. So when the reporting functions began in April 2017, the half funding, as in paragraph 4.3, also began. That funding should be there to enable members of the respective unions to receive support, advice and representation when needed, and also to enable PCC to meet statutory functions and requirements. But there is also so much more that your recognised unions can achieve through inclusion and involvement to save PCC a significant slice of time and money. Involvement in HR, TU meetings, JOSIF, Joint Operating Staff Forum, consultations. They raise problems and issues, and they seek to find solutions before they become demotivators to staff, and before legal or industrial action needs to be considered to rectify a problem or disagreement. However, the ability of your recognised unions to continue at current levels has been compromised. It was our aim to provide figures to HR as requested in respect of this report, but in reality, we simply have not had the provision to do so. Whilst the absence through illness of our branch manager is an exceptional circumstance, the logjam of cases to be handled at the present time is not. This is itself a cyclical problem, as without the funding there to help provide the people, then there are not enough people available to have informal conversations with managers within PCC, and so frequently avoid the need for an issue to become a case in the first place. Therefore, with so many issues by default becoming a case, that needs an investigation or fact-finding meeting, then a disciplinary hearing or grievance hearing, then potentially an appeal hearing. That's a lot of time along with the preparation and discussions with members. The inevitable outcome is that cases are taking longer, members are suffering, and also with our experienced stewards constantly caseworking, this removes our capacity to remain involved in the joint meetings I mentioned before. It reduces the influence of experienced reps to give a balanced and alternative view and avoid workplace issues occurring, and crucially prevents reps from having the capacity to train new reps, as was mentioned, struggling to bring reps through, who can allow the workload to be spread and to eventually succeed those currently elected to their positions. But enough about us as unions. Let's have a look at the effect on PCC. The increased caseload I referred to, which makes it difficult for Unison to find experienced reps to support members. Each of those has an experienced member of HR working for PCC involved. It involves at least one manager, usually more if there's an investigation, 3 panel members for the hearing, 3 more for any appeal. That's quite an increase in the time and money to PCC from the 1 rep and 1 manager that an informal conversation would take. You're quite right though, some issues will become formal no matter what. And so again, I highlight the importance of your recognised unions being able to attend and contribute to meetings that can shape and change policy and procedure to remain fit for purpose. Unison do not see secondments as a segue into permanent roles. Over the last 3.5 years as the biggest union within PCC, Unison have had at different times 6 people on secondment. At this time, we have 2 people covering 3 days a week. With the workload involved, it's inevitable in the short term that there will be delays to when hearings will be able to take place. When trying to find solutions, we have found frequent opposition from management to allowing new stewards to shadow more experienced reps, and with many sections of PCC cut to the bone, there is an increasing reluctance to release reps. Indeed, despite being elected to the role of Joint Branch Secretary by our members, my own secondment of 1 day a week was ended in March by citing business needs. The only viable option presently available is for our elected stewards to take on more cases. The issue for PCC will clearly then be a substantial increase in the need to use facility time and the cost effect of that. The figures given in Table 3 of paragraph 6.1, page 13, show an amount of 41,732 and 57p, given as 0.04% of the pay bill spent on facility time. Only a few years ago, when the total pay bill was higher than it is now, the figure used to be 0.084%. However, to find the 37,500 per annum that's gone missing since April 2017 and return the funding to the previous figure of 75,000 would only require a 0.026% increase on the current pay bill percentage. Unison believes this increase in funding is essential. The experiment in slicing the funding in half has failed, and it is only going to become more and more apparent if something is not changed now. The short-termism on this issue hasn't helped the unions, it hasn't helped our members, it hasn't helped staff throughout PCC, and it hasn't even helped helped PCC itself. So getting this right needs a longer-term approach with immediate funding. There was a scheme at one time within PCC called Spend to Save. We're spending a little more now, saved a lot more over time. Well, that's where we are now. Unison are asking you to spend a little more now to save a lot more in the long run. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tier. Councillor Atkins, thank you for joining us. Do you have any declarations of interest?
No declarations of interest. Sorry, I was late.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, over to you, colleagues. Questions, comments? Councillor Sanders.
Yes, just a few questions really about the report. I recognise this is something the government is telling us to do, so I get that. I'm interested firstly in the data, because in paragraph 5.4 it says, due to the way that education trades union officials report on their union time, which forms part of this data, assumptions have been made in the calculations. in particular, an average number of hours per day has been used based on the working week contained in teachers' contracts. Whenever I see the word assumptions in anything, I automatically get a little worried. How real are your assumptions on that? How realistic are they? Or is it just a finger in the air job?
It's based on the contractual data that we hold on teachers, so it is dependent on the reporting of the schools into us, so it's as accurate as we
Right.
can produce.
Do you, because it's £40,000 spent effectively, it's £11.12p,
Yeah.
or 40 grand spent on that. And given the comments from Unison, which I think are, whatever I may think of them personally, maybe for, sounds like a budget meeting special, to be honest on that one. If we don't know these figures are real, then we can't judge whether in future whether that's a realistic estimate or not. So is there anything that can be changed in order to try and make them more real?
The figures referred to in 5.4 are specifically in relation to education, which has a different funding
Right.
mechanism, I believe, than the funding that
Yeah.
Mr. Tier is referring to, which is the central funding.
Yeah.
That
So his
funding is
argument doesn't
accurate.
relate to the education people?
No.
But I'm still a little bit concerned, because the reasons I'll come back to,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit concerned that the figures are assumptions, basically. In the various tables, we've got 0, 1 to 50%, 51 to 99% and 100%. Can any of those be broken down to be more realistic? Because we seem to have a lot of employees who do very little in terms of facility time, and yet the implication is that, it's about 50%. Can we be more realistic, or are these numbers set to us by government?
The numbers are set by government. We have included a paragraph below the table which just gives a little bit more information in terms of the reality of some of those figures.
Chair, it might be, we can't change anything now, but Chair, it might be useful going forwards if as part of the reports we can actually have a more detailed and accurate breakdown, because I don't want to create a misleading impression how much government may wish us to.
Councillor Sanders, whilst we're on that same point, I think most of us will probably agree with that, but because it's a table that's set out by government, do we then have to use those same percentage brackets in the main public report?
We can amend the public report if members want further information and just use the main table for the government report. We can change that, that's fine.
If you could, because I want to come to my comment and then I will shut up, Ben, which is that I know why this is being done, and it's a belief amongst certain politicians that essentially lots of local government time is being wasted on trades union stuff and everybody's doing lots of things. That does not appear to be the case from these figures, although I recognise Unison's points. And I think the surprising thing is how little time has been spent on trades union facilities, when certain stuff I've read in some of the more partisan media is essentially there's lots of money being wasted. And that is not clear. So I think that is interesting, independent of what our Unison colleagues have said. And I think if that's the case, then we have to be more realistic about it. And I think that the money concerned is a reasonably fair assessment of what unions can do in this organisation. Yesterday I insisted that a particular team of people involved unions in looking at ways that a particular part of the organisation can be improved, because I know the unions here tend to be creative and honest about the situation, which is hugely, hugely helpful. But I think I'm concerned that the government tables are misleading. Because if you've got 15 people doing 5% of the time, that's misleading. And so I would like to be more accurate, but I am intrigued and impressed at how little time is being spent on trades union activities, which means more time is being spent on core activities, and that is the complete opposite of what the people who wanted this to happen thought would be the case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Leader, I believe you indicated.
Well, no, I was interested in the idea from Unison that this is a potential spend to save. It would be very useful to see something in writing to see if that can be looked at, to see if it does fit within the criteria which Chris Ward sets. I'm very happy, very welcome if you could send something in. Thanks.
Thank you, Leader. Anyone else for any questions or comments? Otherwise, I believe we're just here to note the report and to note that it will be published as part of the government reporting as well, in which case can we agree that we go with the recommendations in the paperwork? Any objections? Agreed. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Item 5, sickness absence quarterly reports. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the quarterly report. The first point that should be noted is this is the first quarter where Business Intelligence, the new corporate reporting tool, has been used to provide the information. This is a tool that's available to all managers who have responsibility for staff and budget. BI uses a different calculation in the background compared to the previous EBS system, which has been in place since 2002. It's therefore not been possible to provide comparative data this quarter. The data used within BI will provide members and managers with more accurate sickness reporting in the future, and from this meeting we will be able to provide comparative data next time. Although the 2002 system was reliable in terms of providing us with comparators quarter on quarter, it was unreliable and lacked resilience, hence the move to BI. The level of sickness absence for this quarter is 10.91 average days per person per year. The highest reasons for absence are psychological, which includes stress, anxiety, depression, virus and gastro. It should be noted that musculoskeletal are divided into 3 categories, and if these were grouped, it would actually form the second highest reason. Those reasons, along with our information from services, have informed the wellbeing agenda, and I've included extensive information in the report on that. But just as an overview, we have run campaigns in relation to mental health, and the biggest evidence is around physical wellbeing and increasing this activity too. So this has included healthy walks at lunchtime for staff and encouraging staff to use the stairs. In relation to stress and anxiety, we've introduced lunchtime mindfulness sessions and have introduced a new provider, Solent Mind, to continue running mental health training for managers. We did explore other services, but this has been the most popular, and we've received positive feedback. A campaign was run in relation to the importance of attending appointments for cancer screening, and this is based on the feedback received at the last employment committee, and we are currently working with our trade union colleagues in relation to supporting members of staff experiencing symptoms from the menopause. Our annual campaigns in relation to flu vaccinations will also continue.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Leader?
In some ways it's quite difficult to comment on this because, and I'm creaking or crackling, because we can't see the comparison with what the old system said, and it said very different to what you're now saying this system says. So in some ways I kind of wish we'd keep to one until you can, with the old system, until we could compare apples with apples as opposed to apples to pears. I'm also slightly bemused by this. This is saying that long-term average, so of the 10.91 days on average that this system is reporting, which was I think 7.8 days or 8 days in the old system, and I'm not sure where the extra 3 days have come from, but of the 10.91, 6.7 of that is long-term sick, and that cancer and tumours are the main reason. And yet it then goes down to say the highest reason for sickness absence is psychological in the bullet point, couple of things down below. If out of the 10.9 days sick, 6.7 are long-term sick, and cancer is the biggest issue, in the 4 days that are remaining, I don't understand how that can be that psychological overtakes the cancer bit. But anyway, it'd be useful to look at things. But I'd be really interested in seeing next time to be able to compare apples with apples to apples with pears. Because if the previous reporting stuff has been as rubbish as you're saying, for years we've been looking at reports that tell us things that aren't right, which is kind of worrying.
Would you like to respond? Or
I can try.
Clarify.
In terms of the previous reporting, it was reliable in terms it produced the same data each quarter, so we could compare. What it wasn't effective of doing is looking at work patterns. So the new system that we're transitioning to will do. So there were to use the word that you dislike, assumptions made
Yeah.
in relation to when people work. So the system assumed everybody worked Monday to Friday, 7.4 hours per day, and the calculation worked from there. Obviously, we know with our services that areas like adult social care, absences were being entered on a Saturday or Sunday, and although they were accurately used when managing an individual's absence, they weren't picked up in the corporate reporting, which will attribute to some of the rising.
So-
It's just that the system wasn't able to produce that data.
So if somebody from the port had a Saturday shift that they didn't do because they were ill, in the previous reporting stuff, it wouldn't have shown up on the figures.
It wouldn't have included for the figures for employment committee. It obviously would have been used in relation to pay and when managing
absolutely,
individuals, but no.
Okay, I am sure those of us who've sat around this table for many years, well, I feel slightly bemused that what we've been told for years now appears to be deeply inaccurate. I don't know what Donna thinks.
Well,
Councillor
the other
Jones.
person having been on... Oh, sorry, was Darren first?
Well,
Sorry.
Councillor Corkery was first, but we'll hear Councillor Jones if it's on this point, then we might as well.
Thank you. I mean, having been on this committee, it feels like for most of my adult life with you, I wonder if actually the port reported information in their own little special way, because we've had Martin Putman and we've had Mike Sellers here, and I wonder if when someone was off sick at the weekend, it probably wasn't recorded accurately, so it was a weekend, but they probably just said so-and-so was off for 8 days sick, and they just lumped it into like saying it was on a Monday to Friday. So I genuinely think going forward this is much better. It looks like there are more flags as well as the reasons you can state when people are off sick, which is obviously good. And when you transition from one system to the other, there's always going to be a slight, a month or in this case a quarter discrepancy. So I think it's good to see the more accurate information, but even though I'm not convinced that the port weren't reporting weekends. I just think they were probably reporting it incorrectly, but they were still attributing the number of days sick. So actually, when you look at this, you can still see some correlations, and particularly on this one here, that actually it looks like the port slipped back up again. Now, I know that may not be the case, because I think before they were 14 point something, and now they're back up to 15.36 average days lost per year per employee. When you look at things like adult services, that probably, I think you're absolutely right with that one. I bet you they weren't being recorded, and that's probably why that one is shot up. So we've probably got the more accurate figure now, because I think from memory they were about 14 odd days as well. So that is now looking like it's much, much higher. But actually, the reporting of information is one thing. It's the second point that Rochelle spoke about is about tackling how we get this down and how we deal with it long term is much more of a concern for me. We work in a stressful environment, the council, because of the number of pressures and things that we're dealing with, and also there are cultural issues as well. So I think it's a bit of both, but predominantly the first one, which is the fact that people are working in very stressful environments. And you can see, looking down the list, those people that have a physically more demanding job, whether it be a social worker or it be outside cutting grass, planting plants, I don't know, building, looking after the council's housing estate, whatever it might be. So it is what it is, but we need to work on how we're going to get it down. That's my only comment.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Corkery and then Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. My query is around the summary of reasons for absence. Obviously, the psychological causes being listed as the top factor. Does that subdivide down into work-related psychological conditions and other?
No.
Okay. So we don't record that information at all, do we, about the number of people that have work-related psychological conditions?
There's an area for managers to be able to free type within the system, but we can't report on that in this system. If it's something that members are keen to see, we are currently in the process of procuring, well, I'm not, but the organisation procuring a new HR and finance system, so that's something that we could request if that's something that members are keen to see.
I can see some general nodding, so I think the answer's yes. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. I just want to return to Gerald and Donna's points, because the difficulty we have is that we've got new data based on the new system. And the new data is significantly higher than the old data, pretty much across the piece. So what we don't know at present is the breakdown of dollars 2 points, which is how much of this is just inputting basically, and how much of this is structural. I will go away and I will ask the Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Service how this breaks down. But I think, like Donna, I know that the two services with the highest amount of sickness absence, the three services with the highest amount of sickness absence, are the three main outdoor ones, which is the port, adult social care, and housing, neighbourhood and buildings. I think what might be useful is whether we can break it down further by what types of work exist. Because if we've got a lot of stressful people who are working outside, whether they're dealing with significant cases in forms of adult social workers, or whether because there's a lot of work being done in order to, cut grass and whatever, that may help us in terms of helping you with solutions. So what you're facing is a group of politicians who've sat there and been told almost the complete opposite of what they've been told previously, but a significantly worse position. And we want to know why. And we want to know whether it's just been poor inputting or whether it is a more structural problem. And that, I would suggest, Chair, that we go away and just encourage the team to go away and do some digging around that over the next 3 months, if that's possible.
Okay, I think we need some slight clarification about what it is you want the team to do.
I think Rochelle gives us an idea what she thinks is the case. Is that might be
In terms of the data available, what we could do for the three top services, if those are the areas you want to see more detail, we could split that down into the specific service areas. So instead of it being a directorate-wide, to have a look at it service by service and even have a look if there are specific job roles, job types. Obviously, we would need to be careful that it doesn't shrink to identifiable groups of people, but as long as the size is sufficient, we could bring back some data in terms of that. And just picking up on Councillor Jones's point, I think it's entirely accurate. I think the data is being input in the correct amount of hours. It's just potentially the day of the week that's being chosen was the issue. And adult social care would have been entering Saturdays and Sundays. The port would save that up because the way they entered their absence were by office-based people who would have been in Monday to Friday. So that's highly likely.
Okay, thank you. We had Councillor Atkins now.
Well, yes, so I think I disagree with Darren. I think, personally, I think I'd want to see the report next time so we can compare overalls to see if there are things from that before we go digging down further, because it might be that there are uniform increases everywhere, or it might be that when we can compare apples with apples as opposed to apples with pears, we can see aberrations, and I think that's the bit for me that is interesting before we go charging through down to a lower level.
Okay, perhaps we'll have a bit of a discussion about that in a second. Councillor Atkins.
Two things I want to say. First of all, I was going to echo Councillor Corkery's point about stress. I think stress is a particularly important issue, and I noted you'd broken down musculoskeletal illness, so I wondered if perhaps stress, and particularly actually his right work-related stress, would be something useful to see. On the these are kind of slightly on the digging down point. It struck me when you mentioned Saturdays being the thing that may not have been recorded all that much, that would create quite a jump for one day of the week. So I was wondering if perhaps that's something to look at in more detail.
Yes, apologies, it's not just Saturday, so it would be all weekend working in those areas that are 24/7.
Okay.
It could be shifts that were longer than 7.4 hours, for example. There were the assumptions made around the working day, so that would be why someone like adult social care, which has 24/7 working, so that's all absences for that 48-hour period, would be in the system but just wouldn't be part of this reporting process.
I see. Okay, yeah, so it's actually quite a bit of time during the week that would be covered by that jump. The second thing about digging down is it appeared to me, and perhaps this is me misreading, but on the graph in the middle of page 31, that actually at least two of the services that have the biggest totals for days missed are also the ones with the largest bars for long-term absence. And I just wondered if there was perhaps some unique circumstances that may have contributed in terms of, obviously we can't identify individuals, but it might be worth the managers commenting on whether or not there are particular spikes in long-term absence in those directorates.
Yeah, and one of the benefits, not to try and sell you BI, is that managers have access to their absence data live on the system now. So in terms of Councillor Sanders' point, anyone within the housing directorate would be able to show you that level of breakdown, even if it wasn't appropriate to bring it to employment committee. You can look at that offline. But in terms of that is available, so that's one of the benefits for the services, that they can see their data. And we also have a mechanism in HR that if somebody has been absent for 21 days or more, my staff receive an alert, and that prompts us to contact the service department and ask what is happening. And sometimes it could be that the person has returned to work and they simply haven't closed the record down, so that would prompt that action. But alternatively, if they are absent from work, then that would be the conversation around what are we doing to support that person, or what is it that needs to take place. So there are measures in place, and managers also receive alerts around their open-ended absences as well, part of the BI.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Any other comments before? So I think my feelings are similar to Councillor Jones in that better data is a good thing, and we'll get the comparators quarter to quarter in the next quarter, and that's fine. I understand that, but the general level of sickness, I think, is the more concerning bit, and actually we've not had too much conversation about that, and perhaps that's something that either the administration or scrutiny management panel or similar could consider looking at, and maybe that's something that we can talk to the relevant chairs to about. In terms of what we're asked to look at, and there's two things that I think coming out of the discussion. One will happen anyway at the next quarter, but I think Councillor Sanders and Atkins kind of deep dive into some of the causes might be a helpful thing to look at before the next quarter, if that's something that you're happy for us to do.
Yes, happy to do that if that's requested. And also, just to clarify, the breakdown of workplace stress, are we asking that to be immediate or for the next system? Because obviously if we're looking to compare like for like, if we change the recording mechanism, that will also make it difficult to compare. So are you wanting to see that change now, or when the new system in 2021 comes in? There was a question from Councillor around breaking down the stress category to work-related stress and other stress. So
surely if we were to do it now, the comparison is just one versus two things added up.
Yeah, we can do that,
so we'll
as
do
long
that.
as you're comfortable with that. Yeah,
Definitely. In which case, colleagues, if you're happy with those items as well as the recommendations, which are effectively to note it, we can move on. Everyone happy? Wonderful. Appointment to the Hampshire Pension Fund Panel and Board. Stuart, do you want to just explain, in case some members don't know, particularly thinking about Councillor Atkins and Corkery, who haven't been here before,
Yes.
how it works, what it is?
Yes, as you know, the Hampshire Pension Fund, we have a representative. It alternates on a year-by-year basis, 1 year with a full representative and the other next year with the alternating substitute representative. Councillor Jeanette Smith was the representative previously, and as you can see in there, the dates of future meetings are detailed. It's an important role, Chair, obviously complex and detailed, but the council does well to be represented there, and it's something we should be on, and whoever comes forward obviously needs to know those dates, but the county council are anxious that we are represented on that important board.
And just to clarify, this is a substitute member as Southampton, as the other unitary authority, take the lead this municipal year.
That's correct.
Wonderful. I've had a nomination from Councillor Jeanette Smith as the relevant cabinet member, but I'm open if there are other nominations.
Who she suggested?
Herself.
Oh, herself.
Sorry. There has been a nomination for Councillor Jeanette Smith.
No, not at all. I was thinking Cal.
It's always a good one for the council.
Can I take ambivalence, thank you, Councillor Sanders, to mean that we're happy for Councillor Smith to be the substitute member?
I was going to nominate Councillor Atkins.
I was strong because of work commitments.
Okay, not contentious, Councillor Jeanette Smith. Thank you very much. At which point that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Cal, you don't want to do your pension fund? I went. No, I went. Invest in Hampshire.
Thank you.
They vigorously resist.
Thank you.